It's noon on the West Coast, 3 o'clock at the White House, where President Trump just held a news conference with his Canadian counterpart, Justin Trudeau. President Trump getting a question about the greatest national security threats we face, which is especially interesting considering the trouble that his national security advisor faces. A source now tells Fox News that General Michael Flynn had to apologize to the Vice President of the United States over his contact with the Russians. And as for talk that Flynn could find himself out of a job, the word from that source inside the White House is not so fast. Also, North Korea testing the West with another brand new missile launch with new capabilities. If the country's claims are correct, this represents a dramatic step forward in technology and a new danger to the rest of the world. So what's the plan from the Pentagon? Let's get to it.
Breaking news. Shepard Smith reporting live from the Fox News deck.
And good afternoon. A world of politics and White House intrigue coming in just minutes, but there is major news developing right now, and there is an extreme emergency in the state of California. We're waiting for a news conference to begin moments from now from officials about an hour north of Sacramento, where 188,000 people have been ordered to evacuate their homes. The problem is a very serious one. And there it is. That was the largest dam in America. It is threatening to unleash floodwaters onto a vast area. Officials say the Oroville Dam's main spillway eroded during heavy rain last week. The dam itself is enormous. From the pictures, it's hard to tell, but it's 770 feet tall. That's taller than a 50-story building. It holds back Lake Oroville, a man-made lake that supplies water to about 20 million Californians and farmland in the Central Valley, among the most fertile land in all of America. There's an enormous spillway. The spillway at the top of this dam is about a mile long, and there it is. There's the real problem. It constantly sends water from the lake above to the Feather River down below, but last week, that hole popped up in the spillway. It's hard to tell how big things are from a picture, right? But this hole is bigger than a football field and 2 to 3 stories deep, and it's growing. Now, there's an emergency spillway right next to the concrete spillway. Next to this one, over here, is a sort of earthen spillway. That one is also damaged. If the emergency spillway fails, and there were great concerns that it would, it could send a 30-foot wall of water rushing toward neighborhoods. Homes and businesses could be washed away, along with everything and everyone in them. You can really see how massive this thing is, how much water it could be capable of unleashing. Again, the dam is more than 50 stories high, and the lake is the second largest man-made lake in all of California, supplying water to those 20 million people I mentioned. Now, yesterday, the lake was full to capacity. Now it's gone down just a little bit, so the water isn't going down that damaged spillway. Workers are racing to make repairs because the lake will fill up again, and the waters will rush again, and most likely very soon. Forecasters say a new round of storms is setting its sights on that very area. Rainfall expected to begin Wednesday night and every day for a week after. So the California National Guard reports it has notified every one of its 23,000 soldiers and airmen to be ready to deploy. That's huge news. This is the first time there's been an alert like this for the entire California National Guard since the riots in Los Angeles 25 years ago, after a jury acquitted 4 police officers in the beating of Rodney King. So for the millions of people downriver, this is very, very serious. And Claudia Cowan is live for us, Oroville, California, this afternoon. Claudia, what's the word from officials?
Well, Shepard, we are waiting for a press update from state water officials. We are at the top of the Oroville Dam, and there is progress to report. First of all, that emergency spillway that you talked about, that is holding, and the lake level continues to drop down to about 896 feet. That's about 4 feet below capacity, which is 901 feet. And so it's dropping at about 4 inches per hour, thanks to what's happening here over my right shoulder. They have doubled the releases using the main spillway, which also has suffered significant erosion damage. But you can see the spray there as the water just pounds against this concrete. This is a dramatic sight. Water is gushing at about 100,000 cubic feet per second. Now, the goal is to get the lake level down another 50 or so feet, so there's enough capacity to hold the rain that is set to arrive later this week. Now, this is a much colder system moving in, so we're not expecting to see as much of the heavy downpours that we saw last week, but there is a lot of work to be done here, Shepard, and it needs to be done fast.
Hey, they're using helicopters to try to make repairs on this enormous hole?
That is correct, Shepard. That is also happening right over here to my right. This is a staging area for a lot of the heavy equipment as well as for the media, so you're going to see a lot of other cameras and light stands. But all night long and this morning, convoys of trucks have been coming here delivering huge boulders, which are being used to fill up those white super sacks. And the plan is to use these helicopters to drop the sacks into the holes on that emergency spillway to shore it up. Dozens of heavy-duty sacks you can see sitting here at the ready. Now, this is how levees are often repaired, and this patch-up job is essentially a bit of trial and error because this emergency spillway had never been used before. So we are waiting for these helicopters to take off with these sacks and do this patch-up job. It's essentially like sandbags on steroids, and probably only when this emergency spillway is shored up and fixed is when the emergency evacuation order will be lifted. Shepard, obviously the concern is that they lift the evacuation order, allow everybody to come back to their homes and businesses, and then we have a catastrophe. Everybody has to evacuate again. So that is where we are now. But again, there is progress to report because that lake level is really dropping now.
At least until the rains come. Let's hope they can get it done. Claudia, thank you. Maggie Cabral says it was chaos when they evacuated yesterday. She left with her family, and 15 of them are currently sharing 4 hotel rooms. She's on the phone with us now. What's your concern level today, Maggie?
You know, it's hard to say. Like, part of me feels better knowing that the emergency spillway isn't being used currently, but I don't know. There's always just that thought in the back of your head that something's going to happen, and I don't know. I'm just trying to kind of take it step by step here and stay in tune with the news and listen to what's happening and check in with other family members and see how they're doing elsewhere. So I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, understood. We're looking now. We're looking at the dam. A live look inside the news conference. We're waiting for officials to come update us on it. Again, the reason this is our top story today is 188,000 people have had to evacuate. The entirety of the California National Guard has been put on alert. In addition, they're concerned about this emergency spillway, hoping that the lake levels don't rise anymore to put all of this land in peril. Should we get new information out of this news conference, we'll bring it to you right away. There is very big national news today. North Korea stirring up concerns with a missile launch that appears to demonstrate brand new technology, new to them anyway. The Pentagon warning it can respond to any attack on the United States and its allies, while the president's national security advisor has issues of its own. We're now learning General Michael Flynn has apologized to the Vice President of the United States for what he told the VP about his talks with the Russian ambassador. The central question, did Michael Flynn lie? And before the lie, when he was a private citizen, did Flynn tell the Russians not to worry about the sanctions because the Trump administration would lift them? And further, why would the Trump administration lift them? Did that have something to do with their meddling in our election? Very serious allegations, and they're coming up. The matter of President Trump's national security advisor and his discussions with the Russian ambassador has taken a new and disturbing turn today. A senior West Wing source tells Fox News Michael Flynn has apologized to Vice President Pence. The reason? Last month, Vice President Pence told Fox News Sunday that Flynn assured him he never discussed sanctions with Russia, with that country's ambassador to the U.S., before President Trump took office. That was the assurance. The sanctions were not discussed. It was Christmas greetings. Now it appears that's not true at all. Last week, 9 current and former U.S. officials told the Washington Post newspaper the conversation did in fact happen, that the United States knows it happened because intelligence agencies were listening and recording, and that conversation was potentially illegal. Then a spokesman tried to dial back Flynn's denial. After the revelation that Flynn had been caught by U.S. intelligence, a spokesman said Flynn had no recollection of discussing the sanctions, but can't be sure whether they actually came up. So from, no, we didn't talk about that, to, I really don't remember. And yesterday, a top White House aide refused to say whether President Trump still trusted Flynn.
Well, the White House did not give you anything to say other than that?
They did not give me anything to say.
You cannot. So you cannot say whether or not
and answer, Chuck.
The president still has confidence in his national security advisor.
It's not for me to tell you what's in the president's mind. That's a question for the president. That's a question for our chief of staff.
The president hasn't been publicly asked. The president hasn't publicly commented. Here's the accusation in a nutshell. President Obama levied sanctions on Russia for meddling in the U.S. election. On the same day that happened, then private citizen Michael Flynn called the Russian ambassador, or spoke with him on the phone at least. He said they did not discuss the sanctions. Then, it now appears they did, because it's recorded. The question is, did Flynn tell the Russians that the future Trump administration would lift the sanctions once in power, after all the Russians had just attempted to help him get elected president? Further, is that the reason the Russians didn't react as American intelligence had predicted? As I mentioned, the president hasn't spoken on the matter. Jennifer Griffin's on this. She's at the Pentagon this afternoon. What are you hearing from your source about, well, the White House about Flynn?
Well, Shepard, what's truly unbelievable is that none of the White House correspondents asked the president whether he still has confidence in General Flynn at the press conference that just finished. We're now hearing that Flynn's status is very much up in the air. I spoke to sources close to Flynn this morning. When asked about rumors that Flynn would be gone by the end of the week, this source said wrong and said they would strongly push back on that rumor, describing it as gossip and palace intrigue. A senior West Wing source tells me Flynn met with Vice President Pence this morning and apologized. According to this source, the vice president accepted Flynn's apology. The president had a 2-hour meeting with Flynn this morning in which he turned to Flynn and asked his advice on various national security issues, I'm told. This West Wing official told me the president and vice president were not happy, but he is not going to be gone by the end of the week. Flynn was at the president's side, as you saw, all weekend, Shep. If the inner circle, I'm told, is 4 people in the White House, Flynn is in that inner circle. That's what we know at this time, but this is a very fluid situation, and the decision really is left up to one person, and that person is President Trump. Shep.
So that we're clear on the timeline, first the Russians meddled in our election in an attempt to help President Trump become President Trump. After that, President Obama slapped sanctions on the Russians for meddling in our election, which we caught them doing. On that same day, General Flynn, who at the time was a citizen, a private citizen, he was no longer a member of the military, he certainly wasn't in office because, well, Trump wasn't in office yet, called the Russian ambassador to the United States and said, hey, don't worry about those sanctions. Then the Russians didn't react in the way that our intelligence had thought they would, given the information, and all of this wondering, is there a quid pro quo? Thanks for helping us with that. Now we're not going to help. Now we're not going to make you deal with those sanctions. If that's the timeline, there's real trouble, isn't there?
Well, one clarification, Shep. We are told that when Flynn spoke to the Russian ambassador on December 29th, the same day that those 35 Russian suspected spies were kicked out of the country and sanctions were imposed for the meddling in the election, that was while President Obama was still in charge, that phone call, Flynn changed his story last week and said he could not be sure that sanctions did not come up during that phone call, even though he had told Vice President Pence that they had not come up. Flynn has not admitted or said that he said that the sanctions would be lifted. What we're basing that on are some transcripts that nobody in the press has seen, but there have been reports from former intelligence officials who say that there are FBI transcripts of the phone call between Flynn and the Russian ambassador, and so that's why the story started to change at the end of last week.
Private citizens aren't allowed to have discussions with representatives of other nations. It's a law that's been around since like the 1700s, right?
That's correct. 1799, the Logan Act. The problem is nobody's ever been prosecuted for that act.
But if there have been discussions on this, my understanding of the Logan Act was put in place back in the days of Washington when there were a bunch of founding fathers all wandering around. Some of them were elected and in charge, and some of them weren't. And the idea was, let's keep the ones who weren't elected to do anything from trying to do anything and usurping the power of the elected ones. We were a brand new country then, and since then, as far as we know, nobody's ever really tried to do anything quite like this, as far as we know, right?
Well, this is certainly unprecedented. I think what has angered many in that White House inner circle around President Trump is the fact that it appears that Mike Flynn did lie to the vice president, and that is what really is, I think, causing so much consternation. Was by the president's side all weekend down at Mar-a-Lago when, with that meeting, with the weekend with the Prime Minister of Japan, and he managed the North Korea crisis. But back in the White House this morning, he met with the president and vice president, and I'm told they were not happy that this situation was consuming so much airtime.
Well, this potential trouble for President Trump's national security advisor comes as U.S. officials tell Fox News North Korea has successfully tested a mid-range missile. But this is different than in the past. They say this one happened on Saturday near the city of Kusong, which is about 70 miles north of the capital, Pyongyang. They say this missile flew about 300 miles, then crashed into the Sea of Japan. North Korean officials say the dictator there, Kim Jong-un, was at the test site. They released this picture of him, well, looking at things, which is, par for the course, but and holding a cigarette there. He says the test used a new kind of fuel, new to them, solid rocket fuel that could make it easier to launch attacks by firing missiles from mobile launchers, and lots harder for Americans or anyone else to detect. Back to Jennifer at the Pentagon. What are officials at the Pentagon telling you about this missile test?
Well, U.S. officials tell me it was a successful test of a KN-11 Mod 2, a ballistic missile designed to launch from a submarine. This one was tested on land, however. This type of missile was last tested by North Korea back in April. It has a range of 1,600 miles, but fell well short of a previous missile launch, which flew over Japan. This weekend's missile test coincided, of course, with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's visit with President Trump in Florida. Officials tell me the missile did not enter Japanese waters. The response from President Trump, standing alongside the Japanese Prime Minister, was restrained.
I just want everybody to understand and fully know that the United States of America stands behind Japan, its great ally, 100%.
The Pentagon is not overly worried about this launch, but they are concerned about an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile, that could one day reach the U.S. Shepard.
Jennifer Griffin on two subjects for us from the Pentagon. Jennifer, thank you. Ahead, I'll bring in political reporter A.B. Stoddard, what she says about President Trump's silence on the controversy surrounding General Flynn, and why she says the president might let this slide instead of telling the general, "You're fired." That's next. More now on the White House keeping very quiet about the national security advisor, Michael Flynn, after reports that he had secret and potentially illegal talks with the Russian ambassador about sanctions on Russia. President Trump has said nothing on Twitter. He's not spoken of it at news conferences. At least two different reporters in a news conference that ended a short time ago asked him as he was leaving the room, "Do you still have confidence in General Flynn?" Two reporters said he appeared to hear the question, didn't answer the question. His senior advisor refused to say whether the president still trusts Flynn during an interview on the Sunday shows everywhere but CNN yesterday. Let's bring in A.B. Stoddard, associate editor of RealClearPolitics.com. What's happening here?
Well, I think that according to Jennifer Griffin sources and just the silence over this firestorm, I think there's a good bet here that President Trump is going to keep Lieutenant General Flynn on. I don't mean that it's going to last a long time, but I just think in the immediate future it looks like he's probably going to stay on. I think there's just too much concern from Trump about the idea of looking like there's been a setback less than a month into his presidency. He doesn't like optics going wrong, and so firing would look bad for him. I just think he's going to avoid it.
So the national security advisor told the vice president, "No, I didn't do that." But he had actually done that. And not only did he do that, he, according to these 9 sources to the Washington Post and other sources, he told the Russians, "Don't worry about those sanctions that we put on you for helping Donald Trump win the election. When Donald Trump, or trying to help Donald Trump win the election, when Donald Trump's president, he'll lessen those sanctions, and you don't fire him."
Right. Well, see, I just don't think the issue to Trump is Russia. Trump had many people on his campaign with well-documented connections to the Russians. Paul Manafort, Carter Page, Michael Flynn's connections are known to Donald Trump. Donald Trump has bragged, his sons have, about doing business in Russia or trying to do business in Russia and how much investment they've had there. So if you look at what he has said, the tweets that Donald Trump has written about Vladimir Putin being so smart and really telling the Democrats to get over their losses and everything, I just don't think the Russia issue is a problem here for Donald Trump. I think the problem, obviously, is that he lied to Vice President Pence, and it's indefensible. How can you keep a national security advisor who lied to your vice president? If that's allowed, what else is allowed? But I just don't think at this point that Donald Trump is upset with what Mike Flynn did. He doesn't like that it's a story. He doesn't want to be asked about it. He's going to pick reporters who at a press conference who might not ask about it. But I think he's hoping that it goes away. And what it shows ultimately, Shepard, is that I think that Mike Pence as vice president is on sort of an outer circle of influence, and he's not on the inside where Steve Bannon and Michael Flynn and the people you see in pictures spending the most time with President Trump are.
So Steve Bannon and Michael Flynn are doing more running of the country than the vice president is what you're saying?
Well, they spend more time with him. Speech that President Trump gave at the Mayflower Hotel in April of 2016 before he was the nominee, and the Russian ambassador that is so tight with Michael Flynn was sitting in the front row, probably at the invitation of Mike Flynn. He is in a position of great influence, and it just seems that if he doesn't get fired for this, for lying to the vice president, then he is more influential than the vice president.
It's not as if this is the beginning of questions from Trump's detractors and otherwise, some within his own party and some of those who are close to him having questions about General Flynn. This isn't new.
Right, and the New York Times has reported, I think about 10 days ago, and then again there was in that story that was filed last night about the sort of chaos at the National Security Council, that Steve Bannon's ascent, he is chief strategist, his ascent to the Principals Committee of the National Security Council, which is, as a political staffer, considered sort of very new and different and unique, was because that Bannon's made it clear that he's trying to check Flynn's influence. So there's some kind of tension there, even though the two are always together and were in the open air classified briefing about North Korea at Mar-a-Lago on Saturday night. They seem to be the ones who spend the most time with Trump on all those calls. You see them in the pictures. They're always with him when he's doing any kind of foreign policy or national security discussions or meetings.
A.B. Stoddard, Associate Editor for RealClearPolitics.com and live in our Washington newsroom. Thank you.
Thanks, Shep.
When President Trump announced his controversial travel ban, Canada's Prime Minister sent out a tweet. Everybody's welcome in Canada. A not-so-subtle dig at the president's policies. So it was bound to be an interesting moment when the two came together in D.C. today, right? That's next.
I'm Leah Gabriel with a Fox Report. More of today's headlines. More than 30 people are dead after a tour bus crashed near Taiwan's capital city. The bus turning a corner on an expressway when it flipped, according to a local official. 40 people were on board and the crash trapped many of them. Crews had to use heavy machinery to pry open that bus. 4 snowboarders are dead after an avalanche in the French Alps. Happened earlier today at a ski resort near Albertville. Reports indicate 3 of the victims were from the same family and that they were getting ready to snowboard when that avalanche hit. Teams recovered their bodies this afternoon. And crews near Gainesville, Florida are searching for a missing plane with 3 people on board. Coast Guard teams searching the area around Cedar Key by air and boat. The Air Force is on hand to help narrow down the search. Authorities say the single-engine Piper Cherokee like this one lost contact with radar yesterday morning. The news continues with Shepard Smith right after this.
There's breaking news now on Fox News Channel, and a new legal action has just happened over President Trump's travel ban. Remember last week, judges from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals denied a motion to reinstate that executive order. That order temporarily banned people from 7 Muslim-majority countries from entering the United States. John Roberts has the breaking news at the White House. John, the administration is responding to a request for the full Ninth Circuit to hear the case. Is that right?
Yeah, this happened late on Friday. There was one judge that said that I don't know if they didn't like the decision of the 3-judge panel or just thought that it should be heard by a larger portion of the court, filed a petition in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals to have the entire court, and this would be all 29 active judges, vote on whether or not that TRO, the temporary restraining order, should be reheard by an en-banc session of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. That would be an 11-judge panel. The White House initially didn't look like it was going to appeal the 3-judge ruling to a larger session of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, but now the White House has informed the District Court in Seattle that it will file a brief, and this was requested by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, the deadline being 2 o'clock on Thursday afternoon. It will file a brief with the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals to see if this should be heard by the larger en-banc session. And what they're saying to Judge James Robart, who's the Seattle district judge who was the one who slapped the TRO on the president's extreme betting order, let's put all the proceedings at the district court on hold while we find out what the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals is going to do. So it's not the White House initiating this yet. It's the White House responding to a request from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals.
Got it. All right, John, thank you. One thing. Everybody seems to be leaking about General Flynn. Jennifer has her sources. What are you